I'm more getting right to a kernel of inspiration right away. Oh, a song I heard. Oh, that's great. Uh, I really like how that beat works, or I like what's being said in that piece of music, or oh, this stick has a face in it, and it's totally saying that sort of thing. Uh, Getting more to the point.
Welcome back to Puppeteers. We're your hosts, Adam Krutinger.
And Cameron Garrity.
And today we have on the show Madison J. Cripps. Welcome to the show, buddy. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So Madison J. Cripps, for anybody who doesn't know, is a dear friend of ours and a world-renowned marionettist. He's performed all over the United States, including our hometown in Buffalo and including Adam's living room. And he's racked up some UNIMA citations and has been busking and doing amazing things for a whole long time now. And we're so excited to be able to talk to him. Madison J. Cripps, welcome to Puppeteers.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful to have you.
So let's just start off with, what are you doing right now? Any projects you're working on or anything you're excited about?
What am I doing right now? I'm surviving right now like everybody else. I am currently employed at Rebecca Brooks Fine Jewelry. I am a bench jeweler by trade now. I am father to two sons, a homeowner, a husband. I'm lifing, and I've got all these little puppet ideas. Oh, that's a slam idea. Oh, that's something that could be a cool mech in my brain as I'm doing my daily thing.
Yeah.
And now the dad jokes that I've always been saying, they're actual proper bona fide dad jokes.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that because, like, when we met, neither of us were lifing yet. And now we kind of both are. How is that lifing affected your art and your puppetry?
It has turned it inward, I think, to a large degree. Yeah, it's been a refocusing because I can't anyway. I don't know how you're doing, but I'm not able to do all of the parenting stuff as well as all of the creative stuff that I was before. So it's shifting around quite a bit.
Oh yeah, without a doubt, it's definitely a balance, and having a great partner in that journey of raising kids is the only way it could ever potentially be possible. So yeah, without a doubt.
Oh yeah, without being
I'm happy to do it for you, Adam.
Oh my gosh, okay, I couldn't do it without you. Yeah. But no, that's so cool because I know, and actually, going into being a jeweler is so interesting too. Because first of all, I think the way you built a lot of your puppets probably let you begin with a lot of the skills necessary to do that kind of work. I took some jewelry classes in college as well during my. Actually, I don't have a degree in art and art education. My degree in education, I had to take some art classes too. But I took a couple jewelry making courses, jewelry 1, 2, and 3, and I learned so much in those classes that helped with my puppet building. And I would imagine it would be tenfold the type of skills necessary for marionette making.
Yeah, really, the attention to detail, working even in a smaller format, really getting the millimeters down to a very, very fine degree. A millimeter is like a mile now to me. It's kind of crazy. It's like before it's like, it's close enough. This joint wiggles a little bit. It's good. But in the jewelry world, it's not always the case. It's a lot more technical. I do have a puppet idea that I've started. I've been slowly amassing all these weird little trinkets, and I'm carving a pearl for the main character. So I'm carving a face into the pearl. It's a slow process. Not because it's difficult to carve, because it's really very fun to carve. Just the time, squirreling away the time to get in the shop and do it.
No, absolutely. And I I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about just you mentioned at the beginning of this, and also we were talking a while before about just the creative process in general of thinking like, oh, that could be a really great puppet idea, or like, oh, I'm gonna mark this in my brain because later on it's gonna be a slam piece. Is that always how you've worked, or is that, as you mentioned, starting to work inward, is that kind of a product of this time for you, or is that how you've always kind of approached the process?
So my puppet background is a little bit different than I think a typical puppeteer's, though I don't. That's kind of a misnomer. Typical puppeteer, what's that? We're all people. We all have our own paths. But from my interactions with a lot of puppeteers, there's a performative background in many cases. I come from the fine art end of things. So my studies in fine art, drawing, painting, mainly, really work with honing sort of like an automatic drawing, or like you make a mark and you see what it tells you to do next. And you follow that to the logical conclusion in a drawing or a painting, and you end up with something. More often than not, mine end up being a character or a strange creature, or something like that. And that's always been the case ever since I was little. And so that's where I started when I was first making marionettes. So I'd make a drawing. It was compelling enough, so it inspired me to bring it into 3 dimensions, make it out of wood, or typically wood for me, but sometimes other materials, and then basically again discover what that puppet has to say through performance. And most of the time at that point, I was performing on the street or in my own little bedroom that I converted into a puppet theater. And from there, it just built on each other. I started making more puppets, and each time I performed the same puppet, it would build on that puppet's vocabulary or its story. I'd throw ideas out at the wall, just in the moment, improvisational ideas, non-scripted, and then what played well, what really stuck in my mind, or what the audience gave me good feedback on, it organically grew in that way.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I think that, to answer your question, that's a long way to get around to your question, but now I'm more, because I don't have that amount of time to do the miles of work of drawing and building and performing and finding out in each of those creative processes what the character has to say or what the whole point of it is. I'm more getting right to a kernel of inspiration right away. Oh, a song I heard. Oh, that's great. I really like how that beat works, or I like what's being said in that piece of music, or oh, this stick has a face in it and it's totally saying that sort of thing. Getting more to the point, like the pearl I'm carving, it's got a bulbous hook nose on it. It's a weird pearl. It's a Baroque pearl, and that they kind of grow all knobbly and they're larger, and it it's telling me, oh, I need buck teeth, so I'm making this set of sort of like dentures out of copper, and that's kind of more the process now. Um, it references the older way of doing all the different things, but it's a little more exacting and precise and to the point, I think, because I'm thinking a lot more as I'm going through my day. I have a lot more thinking time instead of doing time. I think that gets to the real difference there.
Right. No, I really like the way that shift kind of happens, and how you're able to refocus your creative energy. I think that's really exciting. I did something else you said, and I'd love to talk about it a little bit, because we've had a few marionettes on the show before, but we've never really gotten into this component of it. And I think it's something that I really appreciate about the form is the vocabulary of movement that comes with each specific marionette. And I think you get that in hand puppets, but because of the movement ability with that, like you could kind of put your hand in any, Muppet style puppet and get them to move more or less the same way. But because of the way that the joints and the stringing and all that stuff works, how does that help you create the different characters? And I imagine that you have such wild and different characters in each puppet you create. Does that vocabulary of movement, like, how does that influence you?
Oh, that's a great multifaceted question, Cam.
And if
The
I'm mischaracterizing that too, like, please let me know,
Yeah,
because
no,
you spend a lot more time with them than I have.
I think there's a give and take. The initial idea of a puppet may come from an aesthetic perspective, or it might, for me, come also from a technical, like, hey, I want the puppet to do this, or wouldn't it be interesting if I restricted the puppet's movements in this way? What if it only had one moving leg, and that's it? It gets a hip joint, a knee joint, and an ankle joint, and that's it. And maybe a little tongue that comes out as a surprise, because I like surprises.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Because I imagined by looking at your work that the part of it, and I don't love the term that I'm going to use in there. The idea came from like essentially a gimmick. What's the hook of this character, right? But one thing that I like that you do, because I think that's typical of a lot of marionettes. I think we have talked about that a little bit with Philip Huber, or maybe there was something he was talking about, when we were at the O'Neill. But like a lot of marionettes are kind of built to do a trick, kind of a thing, right? And one thing that I really love about your work is you have that element, and I would guess that's part of the inspiration of how the character came to be. However, you seem to take that gimmick or that trick that it does and make an entire character out of it that goes beyond. Because a lot of times for those types of puppets, once they do the thing that mech or that trick that puppet does, the joke's kind of over. But like when you do your puppets, when your characters do that move or whatever, it's kind of just beginning. And it kind of creates this whole life, and then just the way, I mean, your performance style is just so captivating too, the way you're just running around and right up to people, and yeah, everything about it is just so compelling.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, I agree. It's the starting point. Yeah, it can be the end all be all, and some of them that is, I as a performer feel at a loss, like, okay, I did the thing, now what do I do with it? It did the thing. Some are completely unperformable after the gimmick or the trick, and sometimes I just need to treat the gimmick like a dead horse and just keep beating it and hammer it home this is what this thing does. And like a joke, it's like the squirrel hiding around the tree, and then
I was just
it
thinking
comes
about
around
that.
the tree. It's funny,
Yeah.
but you gotta say the same joke like enough to get it come back around the tree again and be funny to the audience. And yeah, I think that the way I perform, um, as the puppeteer, I'm the sort of the liaison between the audience and the puppet world. I also don't take no for an answer from an audience, as you might know.
That's the
And
busking in your blood, I think.
I
Yeah.
think it is. Yeah. Otherwise, you don't eat, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably doing a poor job to the audience of we're talking about this, but without necessarily illustrating an idea. But can you describe some of the characters that you do and sort of what some of those jokes or gimmicks are? I'm thinking specifically like the bit of feeding the mouse, for instance. Like it's just so.
Okay. So I have this little rat puppet.
I have one too. It's one of my prized possessions right
Yeah.
now. Hanging in the background of
Oh,
every episode.
that's so sweet.
Do you remember
So
that?
I got this little guy, and half the audience thinks it's a little dog. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the proportions or the way the head's shaped, or they would prefer it to be a dog than a rat because those are more acceptable animals in our culture. I don't know. Anyway, people feed it cheese, and the audience participation is that I have them reach in their pocket and pull out a piece of cheese and shame those who don't imagine along with us. And it really, by that point in the show, that's usually the last puppet that I have. And if people aren't on board yet, they really deserve some lambasting. Like, come on. I start in very gently with a bunny puppet that comes and sings a song about your name, and it's interactive and it's friendly. And as a puppeteer or a performer, I am sussing out, okay, how much can this audience take right now, and where do I think I can bring them throughout the course of the show? And that's my litmus test.
Oh,
And
that's so great.
that's Pinky the mare, part man, part hare, and he'll jump around and sing songs. And then I kind of, based on the reaction, I know I can pull out the vampire at some point or not pull out the vampire at some point. And like if they're scared of Pinky right away, it's like maybe I'll keep that one for another show. And the vampire is pretty funny because he's just this little guy, right, with these two little legs. Not a really useful puppet, but his body hides this trick neck mechanism that runs the entire length of his torso. So I can pull up the rod. He's actually a Sicilian rod style marionette, or based on that concept. And a lot of my puppets are based on the concept of a more traditional style puppet, but then I kind of tweak it in some way because I don't know any better, probably, or I'm trying to use that to my own ends. Anyway, his neck can extend its full length of its body, and I have control to twist the whole head around 360 degrees and put it back down, only because it's on a rod. It's actually on a bass guitar string because it's flexible and I'm able to coil them up for transport. But it's rigid enough that I'm able to spin it around and it doesn't impact the movement in the way a string would. I have more. It's like a rod marionette hybrid. I'm able to get more control over that puppet. And he's
Right.
got
No, that's
these
brilliant.
big bloody claws. So I know that the big bloody claws are going to present like scary to younger audiences or more timid audiences. So I got to like prime that audience up if they're really afraid of the first puppet. Some other tricks. Let's see.
I'll just
Yeah,
I just want to interject for a sec because I think I never I could maybe think about that like in hindsight about your hair or mare, but it's funny to think that actually Milton Berle did that same trick when he would do stand up. He would have 3 different monologues that he would have sort of locked and loaded, and he would go out and tell 3 jokes. One was self-deprecating, one was just like kind of a general like, okay, we're just gonna have a fun time and just laugh at like silly dad jokes type thing. I mean, I'm totally you know, I think that's what it was. And then
you're gonna get the
jokes about his mother-in-law.
society on your butt there, Cam.
I but he would tell these 3 jokes, and the last one was about his mother-in-law, and depending on which one got the biggest laugh, he would know, okay, this audience is gonna need like this set of jokes. And I love that ability for someone to be malleable, and to be that receptive to their audience, because some people, you know, don't have that ability, and you know, you go out in front of an audience and you know from the second you're out there like, oh, this is not going to go well, and they have no way to course correct.
Yeah, and what I like about that too is that you're being malleable, but not in a way that you're not changing who you are and the kind of work that you do too. You're kind of picking different avenues of yourself that'll relate more to the audience. So you're not doing like your kid version of the show necessarily. Actually, do you even have a kid version of? Do you ever do anything like that ever?
You've seen it.
Oh, yeah.
You've seen it.
Well, I guess so.
At Geppetto, he did it.
No, I know. No, I mean like, but like if you were like busking live and doing like the one kind of show, and then like a whole bunch of kids come. Like I know you have your own show that you do like that.
Oh yeah. That it really follows who's in the audience and what they see as interesting. And if I finally get a little crowd, then I can play off of them. They'll stick around for a couple puppets or a few even, depending on how busy they are in their day. And I'll ask them, oh guys, do you want to see something scary, something goofy, or something completely bizarre? And they'll choose what they want to see, and then I'll bring out whatever it is they chose. It's like a choose your own adventure.
That's cool too, because that would also kind of take the edge off, right? Because if you just brought out something scary, the kids would be like, they might actually really be scared. But if they choose it, like, because kids love being scared, you know, as long as they kind of know it's coming. Like there's nothing more they love more than like seeing a scary movie or something like that, or goosebumps, things like that. So like, yeah, if they choose, I want to see something scary, then you could probably go really far then.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the lines I use is, "Were you scared?" And they go, "No." "Would you like to be?" "Yay!"
That's great.
And then I know I'm primed for bringing out the vampire or that.
Yeah, let the dog off the leash.
Right. So what's the prompt to get the sunflower out?
It's there's no real prompt. It's like, okay, I've done this type of show that doesn't involve any audience participation. And when I say show, I mean like bit within a show. So like I did this kind of marionette right before, that bit with the Black Eyed Susan takes audience participation. So I try to bookend it with either shorter or just straight up non-audience participation trick marionettes that have their own thing. So I wouldn't put Schlick, which is the one with only one movable leg. That's pretty heavy audience participation. I wouldn't put that right next to the Black Eyed Susan. I would separate those out. And I ask everybody who brought their watering cans to the puppet show in the biggest, dorkiest possible way. And I'll raise my hand up, and hopefully some people in the audience will raise their hand, and then they will, I'll pick somebody and then have the exchange with them. Meanwhile, the puppet is kind of like suffering from dehydration on stage the whole time. And then we finally get to water the puppet, and then thank you, goodbye. And then the puppet show happens. But yeah, so that's with shouting and shrill voicing and that sort of thing.
I was gonna say, and depending on the audience, a lot of shame about the amount of water in the watering can, and
yeah, and thank you
handle
for
girth and all sorts of things,
because that is one of my guerrilla teaching moments, and it's about horticulture and environmentalism. Too much water is worse than overwatering, is worse than underwatering, is what I say. And then at the end, Black Eyed Susan's talking about all the trace minerals in the soil and how important they are, and sort of like a little sneak the science in.
Yeah, every good puppet show has to have a little bit of curriculum, right?
Yeah, grant money.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to go back a little bit and talk about some of your artistic upbringing. And you mentioned being, first sort of a fine artist. What was your artistic upbringing like? When did it first sort of capture you?
Well, my mother put me in art classes when I was, I think, in elementary school. Like after school, once a week, you get to go play with clay or do the painting at an easel. And that continued. We moved a few different times when I was little. And eventually we ended up in Olympia, Washington, where I spent middle school through the end of college. And since then I had been enrolled in an after school program, and I got to study a little bit of photography and painting and drawing and some printmaking. And when I graduated high school, I started taking classes from a classically trained Russian sculptor named Simon Kogan, and I owe a lot of my fine art education to him. Brilliant individual. Big Russian bear, big sculptor hands. And later, after I started making puppets, I brought my marionette troupe to him to show him. It was a big moment. It's like, I'm doing the things, and there's definitely aesthetic influence in the work that I'm making now, directly from him. And it was really great. He taught plastic anatomy, which is like the three-dimensional drawing of muscles and bones, and how the human body is put together, and how to think about the form and create it in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions, but mainly for me 2 dimensions from a 3 dimensional uh, object or a person, like being able to think about something in the round. um, I use that all the time, all the time.
Oh yeah, well, and those are the kinds of rules that you need to learn, I think, to be able to then break them, right? Like, because I wouldn't say that most of your marionettes necessarily follow any kind of true human anatomy, but you kind of need to know what those structures are to be able to then like play and amplify different things. So you have long legs or a
Mm-hmm.
giant neck and those different things. And I imagine for again for marionette building and construction, just like knowing how hip joints work and all those types of things.
Well, I think that it's strange you point that out. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's because I studied all of those things. I then had the tool set to then just jump in to marionettes and just make the thing that I thought of, and not really worry about, oh, am I doing it right or not right. I watched a video. Yes, on the video was Jim Rose, Philip Huber, Joe Kishore, and I think Scott Land too. Like, you know, the great American marionettist.
I
Like,
was gonna say that's a masterclass.
yes, it is. But it was like a 90-minute video. That's all I saw, and then I went off and I made marionettes. Like, to give them credit, yeah, like they were able to distill an amazing amount of information, but 90 minutes is nothing. And I feel like the foundation that I had, the sculptural foundation, or like thinking about 3 dimensions, I was able to then take that distilled marionette information and then extrapolate out how I could do what I wanted to do, with the form.
Oh, I love that. And so then, how long was it between college and Sandglass for you?
Oh yeah, Sandglass. So I graduated college 2004. I moved from Olympia 2005. Went traveling. Ended up in Northampton, Massachusetts, where working on a small farm, I made my first marionette, and then I don't think it was long after that I took Sandglass uh, Theater Institute level one, and then the following year the level two course that they offered, and I think that was 2007 and eight, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And that again was another profound fundamental experience in, I think, theater making. It was like the theater version of all of the fine art training that I'd been doing, like the dramaturgy and the just like thinking about how to tell a story through physical objects, and thinking all about the different aspects of what's on stage and how it's being presented and what all those things mean or don't mean, and how you can use those components to really drive home a feeling you want the audience to have, or a like a thesis of message that you want the audience to have. The prime example from that is, if you make a puppet out of wood or you make a puppet out of paper, what does it mean when that puppet is then confronted with water? And those fundamental elements are real forces in nature, and we all understand those. And so it's a very different thing for the audience to see a puppet that's made of wood interact with water, or a puppet made of paper interact with water. And because one will float and be fine or go downstream or whatever, or one will disintegrate essentially. And so that like tension or stress or really ease, calm, those choices in a puppet show, you can really get a lot out of. Really get a lot out of the audience and their experience. Give them a very specific type of experience beyond just the how the puppet looks.
Right. Yeah. No, it's that base level understanding of like what these things are, and then how that sort of permeates itself into the narrative function of the show.
And there's a lot
That's
there.
great.
Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but that's
Of course,
the one example that I can bring to mind at this moment. And they're just lovely people and so brilliant and so hardworking. I just love the Sandglass crew.
I was gonna say, I think this is actually our first time talking about Sandglass. Can you just talk a little bit about like the history of the place and who's there and who you learn from?
No.
Okay.
But I won't go into details because I don't know the details. And if you haven't interviewed Eric and Inez, I would definitely do that. They're amazing.
Yeah, they're definitely on our list.
And so I studied with Eric and Inez, and they had a whole. At that point, they were down hosted at UConn, and so we got the facilities at the Puppet Lab there, and Bart was facilitating that, and oh yeah, John Regan. They're up in Putney, Vermont. They're not actually. I live in Northfield now, and they're not too far from me. So it's a pretty funny thing. I ended up in this neck of the woods. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and we'll include information about Sandglass if people want to learn more in the in the show notes.
I've got a little puppet book that they made. Beautiful stuff, gorgeous, and very akin to like my aesthetic, in a beautiful way.
No, I love that. So I would love to talk too about because you mentioned how you watch that 90-minute video with Philip and Jim and Scott and some of those people, and then cut to a couple of years later when you actually get the opportunity to work with them. How did sort of learning under Philip and Jim, how did that sort of change your working process and how you understood those tools?
Yeah, so the first time I took a workshop at a national festival. It was a second national down in Atlanta, I think 2011. Jim Rose taught a Marionette 101 workshop there, and just a very brief, not like the in-depth O'Neill Marionette thing that he did. It was kind of dumbfounding that the person that I had seen teaching on the video was then the same person that I was in that moment studying with and joking around with, and learning some really awesome fundamental just tips and tricks, like even drilling the hole and then sticking the fishing line the Dacron into the hole with some wood glue and then a toothpick and busting it off. Like, what? You don't have to tie every single one. You don't drill through and tie it all. No, you just like, bam, done. Within 2 minutes, you can put a string on a puppet. Yeah, you gotta let it dry a little bit, but it's that quick and simple. And things like that just
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned that too, because I was equally as surprised when I took Jim Rose's class at the O'Neill, being like, "That, yeah, exactly, that's it, yeah." And not only that too, I think it was Philip Huber that taught how to store a marionette. It's like you take it, you twist it all up, and you can just throw it in the bag. I'm like, wait, isn't spinning it like exactly what you don't want it to do? But yeah, he's talking about how it's like just a controlled way of doing it, and it was just like, yeah, these little things. There's just that's something. Even if I started marionettes on my own, I don't think I would have discovered that on accident. I think that's the type of thing I would have had to have been told.
Well, Adam, that was one of the specific tips in the 90-minute video.
Oh, was
how
it?
to store your puppet, how to bring it out and unravel it and then put it back. And I practiced that quite a bit. There was only one time early on where I got a big tangle in my puppet, and I thought, maybe I should cut the strings, and I saw it through to the end, and sure enough, they want to untangle.
Yeah.
They are
I was just
that was a certain way, and they want to return to that untangled state, and it's pretty funny.
That was something Kurt Hunter told me once, my last time at the O'Neill, because I got a pretty bad tangle in one of my marionettes. And he was just like, they want to be untangled. Like they have you've created a natural state for them, and they are trying to find that again. So just like stick with it.
They desire to return to equilibrium, even if they look like this.
Right.
And they'll just.
Yep.
They'll just.
That's exactly right.
Untangle.
Yeah. You know, one thing I wanted to bring up is, I know you're taking.
I want to finish my answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished.
No, I just got to talk about Jim Rose.
Oh, go on.
So then, how many years was it after that? It might have been like 4 years or so after that. I finally made it to the O'Neill.
No, it would have been the next year, because if it was the Atlanta Festival in 2011, our first O'Neill together was 2012.
Shut your face.
Sorry.
Was it really?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
We had the same first O'Neill. And that was 2012.
Oh, you know what I'm thinking of? My very first festival was a regional, actually. So
okay.
my
So you
first
lied to
studying
me.
with Jim Rose was the Atlanta, but okay, that's where I'm off. Okay. So
Got it.
yes, history. Back in 2011. So my first O'Neill, I took the Marionette workshop with Philip Huber, and that gave me the tool that I use even now, where I hear a piece of music and that gives me an idea for a puppet show, and I don't think I thought that way. It's definitely a skill that I've had to strengthen like a muscle and use, and that boot camp is really a good way to do that. And again, I brought this trick marionette in, and I have this photo. I don't even know where it is. It's on an old phone somewhere, probably. It's the two of them at the first day, like the first evening, where everybody in their group gets to show them, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. They took my puppet and are like conferring in the corner and under hushed voices, like, how are we going to do this? And it it didn't take long before they figured out, oh, it's just a modified controller, and you're gonna pull the head through the controller. Like the controller's modular and it's gonna come apart, and that is how I perform it to this day. And
What was the first puppet you brought there? Was it the ballerina?
no, that was the second one that I did there. And the first one is Bolts. He's sort of like this blocky wooden robot like thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's oh, I can't remember the name of the style of marionette. It's the style of marionette where one large puppet comes on stage, but then through the show, the gimmick is that it breaks off into smaller puppets that have their own little dance or whatever, and then they go away. Only this one, it's the body itself, it disassembles. Like the head is connected to a rod that's a pin, and when you pull the pin, the two halves of the body kind of like come unhinged from one another, and they're hooked into the hips. And so each arm has its own little scene, and then they do a dance together. And then at the very end, the hips and the legs do a little dance. And then now I usually have them fall off or trip over a foot, and then they limp off stage. And the whole thing is nonverbal, non-interactive with the audience, and it's fairly honest to what the choreography was that Philip and I worked out. And it was a really fun process, terrifying and fun to work with Philip in that way, one-on-one in the little room, just him, you, the mirror, and the puppet, and just like figuring out the vocabulary, because he's a dancer. He is a dancer, and figuring out the movement vocabulary of each puppet is what brings him joy. I can see it. He turns into like a 4-year-old kid, like, ooh, what movements can I get out of this puppet? And it's a beautiful thing. Beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. It is so interesting. That's what I was trying to say earlier too. Is that like one thing that's interesting about working with him on those types of projects is from what I've noticed is when you work with him at the O'Neill, you often bring your puppet, and then one of the first things you do for the first day or two is doing all these alterations to it. So I guess one thing I'm just wondering is like you built it with a certain intent. Like how do we know when you're working with him how much of that? Oh, I mean, this is gonna. I don't know how this is gonna come out. How much of that advice do you want to take to keep it true to your own original idea, versus how much you wanna? Of course, you're working with a master, and and he's not gonna give you bad advice. But how much of it do you want to keep as your own touch versus some of these new ideas coming in?
I have a really great explanation or example of how that process works, and the second puppet I brought in was Charlotte the Dancer. And like the vampire I was talking about earlier, it originally was a Sicilian rod style marionette. And it had a very specific controller. It was like a trigger controller. So that trigger controlled the legs. If I pushed out, the legs moved one way. If I pulled in, they moved the other way. And then I had a swivel on the head with my thumbs. So I had some pretty decent movement. I could make it walk pretty well. I could have it turn its head. The puppet has no elbows, so it's like always in this sort of movement. that didn't change, but the entire controller and the entire like Sicilian concept was taken out. And now that puppet can dance. The point of the dancer was for it to dance, and it was not able to dance before. Now it can do all sorts of arabesques and beautiful movements. It can even flip completely over, and that's entirely due to Philip's expertise and his own explorations in stringing. He's got an acrobat that's just gorgeous, and the leg stringing that is used in Charlotte the Dancer is the same that he uses in that one, because it allows for that freedom of movement.
I'm glad you mentioned that one, because that was the one I was thinking about, because I was there that year when you were working on that. And I remember, I just have a vivid image in my head of you grinding away at the body to have the leg being able to lift up even higher.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, he's really taking this puppet that he built and put his heart into, and he's really not being overly precious to making changes to this piece of art that he made based on these ideas, which I thought was really interesting. I guess just a quick question to you is, why is it, do you think you ended up, or why is it that you think you chose that style to begin with of the way it was controlled for that character? Was it just like you were fascinated by that technique and you wanted to try it? And then when Philip gave you a little bit more perspective, he said, essentially, that's not the right technique for this type of a character because of the dancing?
So chronologically, I built the dancer and the vampire at the same time, and they used to live together in a bucket with a rod, and I would take that bucket, in the bottom have my harmonica and holder and rat puppet and my busking hat and I think a rope and a blanket or a sheet. So I would tie up my rope, put a blanket or a sheet as a backdrop, and then use that as my stage with my little hat, and I would have the bucket be the holder for all of the puppets, and it was a functional kind of thing. I built those two back to back using the same style controller. And I think it just happened that way.
Yeah.
Like that's what I was interested in. I had this idea to how to make the legs work, and I built it, and was not really thinking about, it needs to be able to dance. Well, it was more of like a 1920s Madame Dance. After the dance, like the personality behind the dancer is kind of more the puppet that I had created, and the character that was created because of the physicality of the puppet. That's how that came to be. But then, to get back to what you said about really grinding down parts of the puppet that I made with my heart and soul. Well, two things. One, Simon Cogan, fine art training, like nothing is precious, and it's all about the work. It's nothing personal. And I think a lot of my artistic experience has been informed by just that very simple thing. Like, you're critiquing my work, you're not critiquing me. We are working together to problem solve a very specific component of the show. Right now, it just means that the physicality of the puppet needs to change. Okay, we have 5 days to put together all of this, from the build to the choreography to the stringing and all of it. Let's get going. We have no time to waste. And I think that I remember that part of, oh, okay, I need to restring it. Cut, 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 cut. And I snipped the head, and I drilled holes in the head, and I put those strings and busted off the toothpicks, and I was like, all right, let's string her up. Let's go. And all in 2 days, I think. It was a whirlwind. But you can't, if you have your mindset on solving a problem like that, you can't worry about the preciousness of, oh, my heart and soul is in this. You gotta just,
you're so right, and I'm so
go
glad we're
for
talking about
what
this,
you have.
because I think this is something that a lot of artists struggle with. Like, how did you? 'Cause I feel, pretty confident in that. I kind of have that viewpoint as well, just trying to make the work better. And I think you said it perfectly. It's not a critique of you; it's a critique of the work. Again, so many people have trouble with that. How can we help people get there? What do you think it is? How did you get there?
Uh, there's two, maybe more, but two come to mind. Two things. Ego. I think my own ego gets in the way, and I have to combat it a lot. Like, oh, this, I really like this thing. Oh, well, my like of that, whatever it is, if it's like a brush stroke that I really am in love with, it's probably a really bad brush stroke, or it's in the wrong place, or it's the wrong color. Or, oh, I really love this mech, how it makes the dancer walk. I had such a beautiful idea. Well, come on. It doesn't really work as well as it needs to. Get over yourself. Get over myself is what I am continually reminding. Humble, humility, humble, be humble. Just do the work. Just buckle down and do the work. And don't get preoccupied in my own head game. Like, oh, that's so cool. Oh, I love it. And find that sheer creative energy and follow that. It's like a discovery process. You're more interested in the creative discovery than the final product. And I think that process versus product, that's another thing that harkens back all the way to my fine art, is like the discovery of a drawing, the discovery of a design, the discovery of a mech, all of that. And I think Fred Thompson does a really beautiful job of discovering over time all of the very fine points of his puppets. He's another one that I've had a really great time getting to know.
Oh yeah, he's absolutely remarkable.
When I first met him, it was like, damn it, we're like brothers separated by 50 years. That's nuts. How does that work?
That's right. Yeah. No, I like your explanation
absolutely.
in that a lot too, because you said one of those trigger words for a lot of people, ego. They don't like to think about
No, ego.
Nobody likes to think about their own ego, or they think, "Oh, I don't have an ego," and it depends on how you define it. That might be partially true. However, I think depending in a true definition of it, there's a healthy amount of ego you have to have in order to literally have confidence in being productive. But to me, I feel like the two pieces of resistance people have to that idea of people critiquing their work is the one that you were talking about, is being overly in love with their work, not being able to get over that aspect of their ego of being able to make that change because it's just the way that they saw it, even though it may be like technically wrong in some way. But the other thing that I think people struggle with it is, if I let in critiques of someone else on my piece, is it still fully mine? Right? That whole idea of this being something completely from my head, right?
Yeah, something from college. I'm reminded of Tom Stoppard wrote a play Arcadia, and there's a concept in there that I think about on the regular. It's this concept of all of human creativity and all the great works throughout history. visualize it as like this parade marching through time. And some of these works are lost, like through war or rot or whatever it is. Oh no, I dropped that tablet and it's gone and it was the most beautiful thing. Well, don't worry, it's not gone forever. It will come up 500 years in the future, only in a different medium, and it will be the same essence. And so that parade carries our creativity along. And I don't know why I just brought that up. What were you talking about?
Oh, we were talking about if having someone critique your work, is it still
Oh,
how
yeah.
much of it's
It
still
never
yours?
really was your work.
Yeah.
It never was your work. It's this, you're just part of the parade and you happen to be carrying this torch for now. It's not really your work.
Yeah.
You are not in a vacuum. And if you think you're in a vacuum, you have a bigger ego than you really think.
Yeah, there's a bigger problem.
Right.
You should address that too.
Yeah.
But it's okay to like say, I am all set right now. I have taken in all of the influences that I have, and I just need to do some incubating and some creative exploration on my own.
Yeah.
And I'm not ready for a critique. I need some time to do the work.
Yeah.
That's totally valid. And there's also it's like cousin of nonviolent communication for artist critique, and I can't remember the lady's name. It's a really beautiful, positive, reinforcing critique experience in which the create and please do some research and put it up on the thing after. So it's a format where the artist poses questions to the panel or the audience or the critiquers, and then gets those back. And then there's a it starts off with affirmation. So the audience say what they like about the piece, and then the artist asks the questions, and then there's a part where the audience is able to, if the artist wants, ask the artist questions about the piece and kind of like dive deeper into aspects of the show that they're interested in learning more about, and then maybe through that process of question discover other avenues for the show, or figure out what is reading or what is not reading. And again, it all depends on who's seeing the work and what their life experience is.
Yeah.
And what they're drawing on.
That's what I just wrote that down too, because I wanted to bring it up. That's the other side of the coin. Not all art is for everyone. So maybe,
Right.
I mean, and from that same standpoint, not all critique is equal too. If it's the wrong audience, yeah, it's just it's about knowing when to take that criticism and why, and really knowing yourself. And also, like you said before, almost keeping your ego in check. Like, am I resisting this because of a personal reason, or would this change truly make the work better? And again, it's always just assessing that line. And sometimes, sometimes it takes a while for it to sink in too. You're like, no, that person's wrong.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, you look at it again and you're like, oh man, now I see it, right? You just need that
Oh,
other
yeah.
perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not all
2 weeks
criticism
is
is equal.
a short timeline, though.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, it's like you said too. Of are you ready to receive the critique? Because I think it's really easy, especially if you're doing something with social media, you show something that's like only part way in process, and people, are immediately giving you feedback, and it's like, no, I'm not in the place where I'm even ready to hear people's feedback because I'm still working on it. And I think being able to recognize that is an important part too.
Yeah, but you shouldn't be posting that if you're not. You don't get when you post something publicly. You are inviting feedback, whether or not you want it. You
Absolutely,
are, right?
Absolutely.
That's well, again. No, I'm glad you said that though, because that's something people might not agree with what I just said. But again, it's a matter between what people should do and what the reality of what's going to happen. Like if you post something and you don't want anyone to say, I mean, people are just going to respond to things. They're just going to do it.
Right.
And it's not even their fault, you know. It's just what you do. It's human nature. It's interaction. So,
yeah, I think that that's just the environment that we create. And if you are putting something out there, that's kind of the point of being alive and being an artist. Like you're expressing yourself. And if it's not, then that is probably more for your own therapy or for a ritual or something else that's a more private kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, it's like that idea of is art
absolutely.
still art if no one sees it? Is people seeing it part of what makes it art, or is it just the creation of it? And I think there's there's validity to both sides, and the answer is probably somewhere in between.
Or just because you didn't see it, does that make it not art? Like you haven't seen all the art
No, sure.
in
I
the
guess more
world.
from the standpoint of being seen at all, because I do know people that do just like you said, make things for a therapeutic type of a reason and never put their stuff out. And there's still art making, but yeah, that's that whole idea. Like, does something need to be seen? Does it need to have criticism in order? Again, even if you look at something like Jackson Pollock, like again, I mean, there's a lot of people who hate his artwork, right? And that doesn't make it not art, right? Again, in the same idea of
Right.
not everything's for everybody.
Yeah, and even all the way back to the masters in the Renaissance, they did miles and miles of studies that were never intended to be seen,
Yeah.
but they're for a finished work that's a larger scale, more finely done, and those are in world museums.
That's right, right? Like
So
sketching, like if you're
Yeah.
doing like a mock-up sketch, is that still art, even though that's not meant to be the final piece, right? That's a good question. Yeah, it's definitely the art
again,
process,
that's
or is that just part of the process to
process.
making the art? Interesting. Yeah. Whoa.
Well, and I like that too about some of the taking it back to your own personal work. In some ways, I think about the pieces that you've created with Philip, because that's a wonderful blending of your style and his style,
Mhm.
and but I can't think of two more different marionettists in a lot of ways than you and Philip, just in terms of your typical final products. But to see you then take the ballet dancer, and I've seen her in your busking shows, where she now has this new wonderful control, and you're able to take that and combine it with your own style, and the way all of that blends together, I think, is just so interesting to see. And that's what I've loved about over almost 10 years now of us knowing each other, seeing the way that work evolves and takes those influences as it comes along.
Yeah, I have a good analogy or metaphor for it. So uh, picture a stage light, like an old school stage light, not these new LED things. And it's got the bulb, right? That's you. That's your creative spark. That is purely just you. Now put over that a filter. So in my case, I'm the bulb, and then the first filter might be my fine art teacher Simon. So I'm filtering my creative spark through the anatomy or the color theory that I learned from him, or the composition, right? All that training, that's a filter. and then another filter might be the work I did with Philip Huber. So there's these two filters, but that light that's still going through those filters, that's still my creative spark. That's still my inspiration. That's still mine. It's all melded in with all of my experiences and the different filters, but it's still coming through. And I just thought of that might be a good analogy.
No, I like that a lot. That's great.
That's beautiful. I did want to talk about just because this is the first interview that we've done with someone since Jim Rose passed away. And I'd love, you talked a little bit about him and, learning the toothpick thing and stuff like that. But if you could just talk a little bit about him for people who may not be familiar of just what kind of a mentor he was to you and what you learned from him as a person.
Oh my goodness. He's salt of the earth. Just a beautiful, loving, talented, and expansive, knowledgeable person. He felt like the rock that then you can put all of these other things on, but you have a stable base of knowledge and expertise and experience. As a person, he was always so patient, and I know he gave everybody in the room the time that they needed, and was always available at the O'Neill for that mentorship. Personally, I felt really privileged to get the chance to work with him, and also work around him, not necessarily directly with him, but he was always, the marionette strand at the O'Neill is like there's two halves of it, but they're like it's like a walnut. There's two halves, but they're still within the same shell. And his, I think the biggest contribution creatively that he gave me was, oddly enough, through that video that I watched before I made my first marionette. And he on that video he performed his Pepito marionette, which is kind of his signature. It's like if Jim Henson's Kermit the Frog kind of like relationship there, and it's such a beautiful, special thing to see. And he has this controller that controls the pronation and supination of the hand, and it's such a delicate, nuanced movement. And I thought, oh, that is a brilliant little control. It's the letter T suspended from the typical airplane control, and then one string goes to the thumb side and the other string on the top of the T goes to the pinky side. And so you're able to control this beautiful, delicate movement. And I used that concept in the first puppet I made to control the opening and closing of a hand, so that I could pick up a broom, and the character turned out to be a street sweeper. Before, he was going to be a white knight or something like that, and he ended up being a street sweeper because I made a broom for him. And so that direct creative inspiration lineage from Jim Rose. That's a fundamental building block of my show.
That's
Yeah.
excellent. And that's the character that's right beside you, right?
Yeah, that's Sammy Miner.
Love it. Well,
who is anatomically correct, by the way.
I'm sorry?
Who is anatomically correct, by the way.
Oh.
Oh, okay. Just, do you mean in like in the proportions and such, or?
No,
Or do you
I
mean the hand?
painted little cute little buns and genitals on him.
Oh. Understood. Adam, did you have anything else that you wanted to cover?
No, I'm just you've always been a really inspiring artist to me ever since, I met you, which is why I knew that I needed to have like a little piece of your work. And I love this little guy that I have hanging in my office. I use him as inspiration all the time. And my daughter loves playing with him too, for the exact same reasons that you mentioned before. And I just can't wait to see really what you come up with next and to keep watching what you're doing.
Yeah, me too. I want to say a couple things. I studied with Ronnie Burkett at the O'Neill as well, and he said something to me that was, I think, really profound. That kind of like shifted maybe the beginning of where I am now. Is that you got to find what you're saying. What is it that you're saying? It's all well and good to entertain, and I'm paraphrasing, but what's the message? And I'm still working through that. I think I know the environment has always been important to me, and I think having a family and kids specifically is shifting my focus and certainly my understanding of the world in a great way.
Yeah.
And I think that's about it.
Yeah, no, again, like just I can see
that.
that it's hard because sometimes like people don't see it in themselves because like I don't know exactly what you're saying, but I feel like whatever you're saying in your performance is very concentrated. And, you're just so, when you perform, like, you're so unapologetically yourself and unique in a way that you rarely see in performers. And like I say, it's so compelling. And watching you, at the pub at the O'Neill and at the Geppetto Festival and the other festivals I've seen you at, it's just like, it's hard for me to explain your work and watching it other than just how it makes me feel. And again, I'd say watching you work just like inspires me to want to create more unique original work too, which and I think anyone else who watches your work would feel the same way.
Definitely.
That is one of the biggest compliments I think I could ever get is knowing that what I do is inspiring others to do what inspires them.
No, that's great. Well, as we wrap up the 69th episode of Puppeteers Podcast.
Oh, yeah.
The sexiest episode yet. We'd love to hear if you have a good puppeteer story in the spirit of Mr. Jim Krupa, a time where something didn't go quite right, where we can now kind of laugh about the failure.
Oh my goodness, a puppeteer story. I don't know if it's like if it meets that benchmark, and I am definitely not an angel burning puppeteer. I think that this one time because it's marionettes, right? It's obviously a tangling story. And those happen. those happen a fair amount, especially backstage in the dark, in spite of um, little lamps and stuff lighting the way. There will be moments where the vampire's claw hooks onto somebody's string, or the rat just decides to jump off the stand and get tangled in the bottom of the bin. Luckily, he's got 4 strings, and I think I could untangle him in the dark, blindfolded in a blizzard. I don't want to test it, but I think I could do that. But this one time, I took the frog puppet out, and his act, after workshopping the dancer with Philip, he kind of inspired me to push all of my puppet movements further and further than I had before. So this frog comes out. He's got really nimble, supple legs like a frog should have. He's wearing these little brown shoes, and the ankle hinge is it's just like eye hooks, really. So there's like full movement of that, but they're not they just follow along the legs. The arms are fists. There's no joint in the wrist. There's only elbow and shoulder. And then his whole body, again, sort of using the technology of the vampire, his whole body houses this long tongue. So when you tilt the controller, the tongue goes out, and when you tilt the back of the controller up, the tongue goes back in. And that's the gimmick, the trick puppet part of it. But I started pushing his movements in his show. So he comes out, "Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey," and I don't know why, but he just started wanting to jump more because he's a frog, right? So jumping off of walls, jumping off of curbs, and then at a certain point, he just like ran up, jumped, and then did a backward somersault. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is awesome. This is now part of the show. Fast forward years later, it's still part of the show. He comes out, does his thing. I hadn't prepped him as well as I should have, probably, that performance. And he lands, and his arm is like in all of his strings, but like down. There is no way coming out of that, because I don't have a string that can pull his arm up out of all of this tangle. So he basically just rivet off and off stage. Like, that's all you can do at a certain point. It's like, okay, well, that act is now 3 minutes instead of 5. I guess I'm gonna have to vamp somewhere else in the show.
Right. Yeah, it's time to pull out a new guy. Oh my gosh.
And now for something completely different.
It's when you wished you had either a duplicate puppet or someone in the wings for you, like to quickly untangle it or something.
Oh yeah.
I can imagine, well, I guess I can imagine either way, that you might have a really quick busking nightmare story of like some heckler that was just like horrible or something. Because on one side I say maybe you don't have one because you seem like you'd be really good at handling hecklers, but how also I know there is that special type of asshole too that exists. Do you have some kind of a nightmarish story about something like that ever happening?
I don't have a nightmarish story about hecklers. I am actually the heckler on the street in my show. Like I heckle.
That's true, right? Like be
puppets
rather than take down the biggest baddest person, be the biggest baddest person, so no one else can live up to it. Yeah. I just have this nightmare image of someone just running up and just kicking, like punting one of the marionettes while you're holding it from the strings or something.
Oh yeah, that has happened, and I do publicly shame them. Um, so yeah, that has been a problem. Oftentimes it's little kids that are um, experiencing intense emotion and they don't really know how to uh, process it. So they'll like hit the puppet, and then I'll be like, "Do not hit the puppet. This has been a public service announcement by Cripps Puppets. Thank you. And now back to your previously scheduled show." Uh, so I've figured out ways to deal with that sort of thing. I think the biggest problem is kids will steal the show or pets will steal the show, and kind of derail it, and it's like this tightrope act to get it back on track sometimes. Um, Birthday parties are a prime example of that because the birthday kid is like real sugared up and not sitting still, and the parents have hired me to babysit essentially.
Oh yeah.
So that,
But they hired the puppeteer to be the babysitter, Madison.
Oh yeah.
No, I've literally I've done birthday parties where they literally locked me in the basement with the kids. Like I went up to try to go to the bathroom at one point. I was like, "It's locked! I'm locked down here! Oh my gosh!" And the adults are just upstairs drinking or whatever. I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" And they unlocked the door at the time the show that was supposed to end. I'm like, "Oh my gosh." No, but that being said, no, but this has been great, Madison. I am excited to have you back on again.
This.
I would love to do another one where we almost like make it like a mastermind on busking, because I feel like there's so much we could even just talk about just on that topic alone, because it's such a unique. Not only is it a unique art form, kind of, but you have to have unique skills and thick skin and confidence to be able to do that. And I think that could be a really cool conversation in the future.
It's all a facade.
Well, that's what we have to learn about. The facade.
Right.
But anyway, Madison, before we go, what's the best way for people to be able to follow your work?
Because my work has been kind of added to, it's not just puppetry anymore. Cripps Creations, CRIPPS Creations.com is the website, and it's got the jewelry and the puppetry, and my wife's doing taxidermy, so like it all mixes together, and it's the way to plug in.
Do you have any social media handles as well?
Yes.
We'll put them on the screen.
It's all on the screen right here.
Okay, great.
You're on Facebook and Instagram.
And Twitter, but I haven't accessed that in a while.
Yeah.
So leave all your critiques.
All the handles are here.
Put the critiques on Twitter so we don't have to see them.
Yeah.
This was great. Thanks so much, Madison.
My ego's too big.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. This was great.
Yeah. Thank you as well.
Bye, bud.
We're at the end of another episode of Puppeteers, but the fun doesn't stop here.
Visit puppeteers.com for show notes and links to projects mentioned in this episode.
Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at PuppeteersPod, where we're posting new things every day.
Puppeteers is edited by Matt Bowen and made possible thanks to viewers like you.
If you enjoy this content, you can join our incredible Patreon patrons who are supporting the show for as little as $1 per episode. Those folks get access to early releases, uncut episodes, official Cup O tiers just like we use on the show, and can even submit interview questions for our guests. Go to patreon.com/puppeteerspod to learn more.
Another great way to support Puppeteers is rating and reviewing us on iTunes, leaving a comment or subscribing to this channel, or tell a friend about your favorite episode.
Thanks again for joining us on Puppeteers Puppetry Shop Talk, in-depth interviews with the world's most passionate puppeteers.
Hosted by me, Adam Krutinger.
And me, Cameron Garrity.
Also recording outside of this. No, I almost forgot. I don't even remember how we do this. Oh my. Welcome back to Puppeteers. We're your hosts, Adam Krutinger. And today we have Madison J. Cripps, right? You want the J in there still?
Sure. I mean, it's post 45, so I can bring the J back.
Yeah, good. Okay. Does the J still stand for jackass? That's what I think you told me when I first met you.
Asshole.
Oh, the J stands for
Asshole.
asshole. That's what it was. Okay, I knew it was something. The J stands for asshole. Oh my God, you're brilliant.